Stories with CrispySkates. And we are picking up where we left off the other day reading King Arthur. And I'm very glad that you guys are here. Let's dive in. One dark night, while a storm was raging, Merlin stood at one of his 70 windows and looked and looked and looked up at the wild sky. He was expecting to see something there, something very unusual and wonderful, which one of his fairy books had told him to expect. For a long time, however, nothing happened. The watching magician saw only the clouds racing like inky shadows over the clear, high spaces that were sprinkled with stars. Then, suddenly, he caught sight of a little pearly glimmer in the north. This little pearly glimmer grew brighter and brighter. It turned from silver to gold, and from gold to deep, shining red, like the red of rubies. Merlin gazed still more eagerly and presently, and in the heart of the red glow, he saw a great star brighten. As you might see, a crimson spark suddenly break into a shining flame. For the great star, one ray shot out, suddenly bright and brilliant as a diamond, and slender as the knight's spear. At the end of the ray appeared a globe of fire, which, as Merlin watched, uncoiled itself slowly and took the shape of a beautiful but terrifying dragon. This fiery dragon opened its mouth, and the scent of two more rays, one on the east and the other on the west, and the eastern ray seemed to have no end, but spread out into a great glow that you might also almost have thought the sun was just about to rise. The ray to the west led to the night shadows and then broke up into 7 smaller rays, which spread themselves in the golden fan above the shadowy peaks of the distant hills. When Merlin had seen all that this had happened, he laughed gladly, and flying down the long staircase of his fairy home, he, as lightly as a bird or a butterfly, he set off invisible wings through the night. Always the fiery dragon shone in the sky overhead, and Merlin knew that its bright front was just hanging over the castle of the other king. The wizard drew near the castle. He dropped to his feet on the grass and took the form of an old man wrapped in a cloak. With his white beard blowing about him in the wind, the hood of the cloak drawn over his eyes and the forehead, Merlin walked up to the castle gates and knocked loudly with its staff. Now all the time the great flaming dragon was stretching out across the sky, bathing the towers with the turrets of the castle in crimson light, fiery and frightful. The guards and the servants, the porters and the cooks and the pages had seen it and were very, very much frightened. Nobody dared to answer the door at first, so Merlin knocked again, much more loudly. Then a terrified porter appeared. The magician, in a voice of authority, demanded to be taken to the presence of the king. There was something in Merlin's voice that the porter dared not disobey. He hurriedly opened the great gate and let the old man in. Then he led Merlin through the courtyard, all aglow with the dragon's light, down the great stone corridor, across the hall, hung with gorgeous tapestry, where trembling pages waited, dressed in satins and silks. There the porter caused and pointed, and Merlin went on alone right into the royal apartment of the king. King Uther sat on his throne, pale and grave and quiet alone. Though a great window, curtainless and arched, came the fiery glow of the dragon in the sky. It stained the fresh green rushes of the floor crimson and shone all about the solitary figure of the king. Uther looked up at the sound of the footsteps and saw an old man coming slowly up the room, wrapped in a long cloak with a snow-white beard that streamed in long, thick strands far below his waist. "Who are you? Why do you come here unbidden and unannounced?" demanded the king sternly. Before he finished speaking, the old man drew back his cloak, and Uther saw who he was. "Merlin, my friend Merlin," he cried and altered his voice. "I am indeed glad that you have come. What means this blaze and terrifying dragon in the sky? It is the sign of some cruel disaster, some great trouble that is about to fall upon my house." Then Merlin answered. His voice sounded so joyous and triumphant that the King Uther knew the news good even before the magician spoke. "The dragon is the most wonderful sign that has ever shone in the sky above the castle of a king," cried Merlin. "I have been watching it for night after night, hoping and longing to see it come. It means that you and the beautiful lady you love, a little prince, will be born. The little prince will be the greatest king of the whole world has ever seen. He reign over many subjects and will conquer all of his enemies. He is the ray that goes from the mouth of the dragon to the east, and he will be as bright and as beautiful as the rising sun. The ray that goes to the west and breaks up into 7 rays is your daughter. She will be a princess, but a fairy, and have 7 fairy children who will teach men children of the west songs that fairies sing. See now the 7 rays and end in the shining mist. That is the meaning of the fiery dragon, King Uther. The meaning that I have hurried to your presence to explain." Uther listened brightly and breathlessly, while the light of the dragon shone crimson upon the faces of the hands and the robes of the old wizard and the young king. Then Uther leaned forward and pressed his fingers on Merlin's arm. "My beautiful lady," he said eagerly, "do you mean Eugene?" He could hardly wait for Merlin's reply, because he loved Eugene for many months, but she was shut up in a castle quite out of his reach. "Yes, I mean Eugene," answered Merlin. "I promise that you shall have her as your bride. I promise too that you shall have this bright and beautiful prince and this fairy-like princess for your children. But if you marry Eugene, though my help, you must make me a promise in return." "And what is that?" asked Arthur. "Tell me. There is no promise that I would not make for the sake of the beautiful Eugene. You must promise that your little son that is born, you will let me take care of him. He has great work to do in this world and can lean to do it only if I have care of him. Give me your promise. Uther and I will set about the performance of mine. King Uther for a moment felt uncertain and sad. Where would be the gladness of in a little princely son of the child was taken away from him as soon as he was born. But he loved Eugene so passionately that after hesitating for only a second, he consented. Very well, Merlin, he cried. Very well, you shall have your little son up as your own child, if you will only make it possible for me to marry the beautiful Lady Eugene. The red shining light through the window fell from the fiery dragon in the sky and grew stronger, fiercer as Uther spoke. When he had given the promise, the light blazed crimson and awful about the throne. About he sat and glistened upon the diamonds and sapphires in his scepter and crown. A pearl of thunder rolled above the palace. A flashing light darted about the gray stone towers. The blazing dragon seemed to close its jaws. As it closed them, the rays drew slowly back to its great mouth, the one ray from the east and the 7 rays from the west. It stretched out its long fiery claws, and 2 great golden wing rose, waving over its golden head. Then for an instant it spread out its wings and hung poised above the castle, so that the pages and cooks and scullions and porters hid themselves in the darkest corners and cupboards and cellars that they could find. But instead of swooping down upon the castle, they expected the blazing dragon, struck its wings together once, twice, thrice. Once, twice, thrice, the thunder pealed out again, and before its echoes had died away, the fiery creature had short, swift, an arrow far through the night sky, leaving behind it a long tail of starry light, like the tail of a comet. King Uther had crouched for a moment and covered his face. When he took his jeweled satin cloak from his eyes, the royal throne room was empty, dark and still. Merlin had vanished with the dragon and had gone back to the fiery house of 70 windows and doors. The king was left alone with the promise of a beautiful bride and a wonderful son. The king stepped down from his throne, and went to the window. He looked up to the sky and saw it dark and clear, silvered over the little quiet stars, and then summoned a herald who came to trembling and told him to take his trumpet and go through the castle, crying aloud these words: King Uther has been told the meaning of the blazing dragon in the sky. It is the great gladness and victory and well-being for himself, for his kingdom. For now the king will be known as the Uther Pendragon. When he lays commands on his royal sculptures, the golden dragons immediately be mad. One of these dragons will be set upon the capital of his kingdom. The other will be carried by his royal standard bearer into the battle. These are the orders of the Uther Pendragon, king, the lordly and the ancient country of Britain. Oh, this is King Arthur, by the way. I'm sorry, I just saw that. Bryce 7. The Sword of the King. When Matins and the first Mass was done, there was seen in the churchyard against the high altar a great stone square, like unto a marble stone, and in the midst thereof, like an anvil of steel a foot on high, and therein stuck a fair sword naked by the point. The letters there were written in gold about the sword that said thus, Whoso pulleth out the sword of this stone and anvil is rightwise king born of England. In due time, Merlin kept his promise to King Arthur. It so happened that glorious Duke of Cornwall, who had kept Eugene shut up in his castle, was overthrown and slain in battle, and Arthur became the owner of the castle. All that Merlin had promised now had come true, and Arthur hastened to visit his beloved, winsome Eugene, and to tell her that he loved her and that he would always protect her. And so she married him and became his queen. After the marriage, King Arthur penned a dragon, and his sweet, lovely lady, Eugene, lived very happily in Tintagel Castle by the Cornish Sea. You may see the ruins of it now, but you can never imagine perhaps how fine and strong it was in those days, hundreds of years ago. Massive gray towers rose above the great gray roofs, and archers practiced shooting from strong, high walls. Sometimes the big gates and doors were closed. Sometimes they were open wide to let out companies of soldiers dressed in bright armor and riding on handsome, spirited horses with gay bridles and reins. In the evening, sound of music and laughter came inside. Minstrels with harps played and sang to the king and queen, and funny dwarfs in hats and bells made jokes, or danced absurd little dances among the rushes on the floor. Oh, it was a wonderful place. It was Tintagel. And will you never see anything like it nowadays? Folks were brave and cheerful then, and though they no doubt had terrific battles with their neighbors, they were so gay and courageous between times that lives passed as happily as possible. What with work and play, banquets and tournaments, the knights loved and fought for the fair ladies. The ladies loved to look after the knights, and the bravest, most loving, and fairest of all were King Arthur, Pendragon, and Eugene, the queen. As the days passed, they were very happy together at Tintagel, and by their little son was born, and poor Eugene, now told Arthur, had promised to give the baby instantly to Merlin's charge. She was very sad about this, but she would not ask the king to break his word. Besides, she and Arthur had often talked of the great future which Merlin had foretold for their child. So the king and queen kissed the baby prince, and the queen herself wrapped him up in a beautiful cloak of gold, and gave him to that charge of the two ladies and the two knights. Then Arthur told the two ladies and the two knights to carry the tiny prince to a certain little half-hidden door in the castle wall, to open this door softly and silently, and to give the child into the arms of somebody who would be waiting to receive it. Singing little soft lullabies, the two ladies stepped carefully down the corridor and followed by two knights. They reached the winding stairs and went down, down, down to the little half-hidden door. On a golden cushion, one lady carried the sleeping baby, its golden cloak. Their other carried a tall candle, and the two knights walking behind carried two or more candles, tall and still, which cast strange waving shadows on the gray walls. Oh, thanks for the likes, guys. They opened the door, and the light of the candles shone out to the dark, still night. From among the shadows came a dim, tall figure, not unlike a shadow itself, but the figure held out its hands for the baby, and the ladies and the knights, without a word, gave the tiny boy into the mysterious stranger's arms. And thus was Arthur. All as soon as born, delivered a secret postern gate to Merlin to be holden far apart until his hour should come. They went back through the door with their candles and empty golden cushion, and as they climbed up, up, up the winding staircase, they heard slowly dying in the distance the sound of the footsteps of trotting horse. On the horse rode Merlin with the baby. Over the hill and dale he went until they reached a quiet, small castle in the valley. Here lived a good, sober knight called Sir Hector, who knew well why Merlin had come. Long ago, the magician had told the king Arthur had sent for Sir Hector and had asked if he would receive a little child into his house, a little child who was to become a very great and famous, but who must be brought up simply as a noble knight's son. Sir Hector had consented and had been given lands and riches in return. So, when Merlin rode up in the dark night, Sir Hector and his wife met the magician gladly and took the baby straight into their own nursery. And then Merlin had a little prince christened Arthur. And Sir Hector brought him up as his own good, peaceful, happy home. But Merlin was always at hand, watching over the boy. His father, King Arthur, was content to leave little Arthur in the great wizard's charge. However, when he was dying, he sent for Merlin and asked for news of the child. All right, you guys. Let's end right there. What do you think? News of the child. Thank you for being here. I hope you have a lovely evening.